If you are fed up with sticking to all the details in your watercolor painting, I'm going to share with you my exact technique that allowed me to go from this scene on the photo that you see to this watercolor without going too much into the detail. It all started with this photo from one student that I coach, and she wanted to paint this photo into watercolor. And when you look at this kind of topic, it's complicated to to see how you can interpret it your way. You want to stick to every single detail, to the tree, to the trunk, to the stairs, to the houses behind. And when I showed them, okay, you don't need to paint everything, just focus on the tree, for example, and make sure that the tree has a wow effect. Just like this one, you can play with the colors. On this one, you can play with the light, and it creates in seconds a wow effect just by painting one element of the painting. And when I started showing them that by only focusing not on the tree this time, but on the houses in the background, then you can make the light shine in second with a few brush strokes, as you can see here. And then when I move forward, you can see that, okay, this one. Here you can see that the tree, it serves the background. And when you compare this watercolor painting with this watercolor painting based on the same photo, the same reference photo, you can see that it really depends on which part of the photo you decide to put your focus on. And when I showed my students how I did in order to convey this light, they asked me, but it's very difficult how you did that, how you did this part, because I want to create all the trees, I want to create all the little details. How do you come up with something that suggests what's in the scene without painting everything? And this is when I shared this exact technique. The first thing that you need to do is to observe. Observe how, let me pause it. Observe how the light is shining on the topic. And in order for you to make it things simpler, without going into the whole painting here, just zoom on the area where you find it difficult to suggest without going too much into the details. And this is exactly the question of one of my students during this live painting with them. It was, okay, how did you come up with that kind of stuff in your watercolor painting? So the first thing you need to do is to observe where are the shadows, but not only the shadows. What you also need to spot is the difference between the dark areas and the light areas. So here you can see, and it's also linked to the shadow, but it's more global, more general to consider it as a light area and a dark area. So here, as you can see, it's a shadow. The shadow here is the dark area, and the roof here is the light area. Let me zoom it for you. This part here, the wall on the side here, it's darker. So it's in the shadow, of course, but it's darker compared with this wall, which is lighter, but it's also in the dark, this one. It's not, this part of the wall is not very light, but it's lighter than this part here, which is darker. And by observing, okay, where are the light areas and where are the dark areas, you will be able to spot the shape of the dark areas. And by doing so, then you can go to the second step, which is painting the dark areas. So this is exactly what I did. For example, one of the question of my students is, why do you paint the window? Because the windows are not shadows. But I told her, okay, you just have to spot the dark areas. Here the windows are darker than the wall, so you have to paint them. Even though you can consider that the wall is in the shadow, but as the windows are darker, you just paint the windows. And then under the roof here, you can see that there is a kind of shadow. It's darker, so you paint it. And then you paint the background in order to make the house pop. And then let me move it forward. Here you can see I paint the tree, and I paint also the little wall here of the stairs. And I let a little line here in white, because what I spotted is that there is some light on the wall. So the wall is dark, but on top of the wall, there is a little bit of light. So this is the second step. Without going into the detail of the shape, just paint the shape with the trees, with the shadow under the roof, with the wall, and you let the blank of the paper for the light on the top of the wall. So after you finished painting this shape, this is the third and last step, which is the texture. And in terms of texture, you have to identify, you have to spot the darkest area inside the dark area, inside the shape that you just painted. Spot the darkest area. So for example, here it's a darkest area. Here it's the darkest area. Here you can see that between this wall and this wall, there is a corner which is darker, even darker than the walls. Just under the roof, it's also a little bit darker. And in that way, when you spot that kind of darkest area, you just need to put a little bit of pigment without adding too much water in order to keep the control of the soft edges that you are going to create. Here you can see that I take neutral tint plus burnt sienna. I have more pigment, and I put exactly what I told you in this area. Here you can see I put a little bit of pigment on top of the shape that I just painted. So this is when you add some texture. This is when you put a little bit more of tonality, a little bit more of pigment on the wall. So for example, here you can see that there are darker spots on the wall. So I put darker pigments on the wall. The same for the trees. And then let me just move forward, and I add a little bit of trunk here from the trees that are in front of the walls, and I also add a little bit of pigment. For example, also the stairs here, I add the stairs. It's not called the stairs, but it's like a ramp for the stairs. And then you can see that by adding some pigments here, some pigments there, and at the same time let the first wash breathe behind, then you will be able to convey something that, okay, I have the feeling that it's some tree, but it's not exactly. When you look closer, it doesn't look like a tree. But, and okay, this part is very important. Here, okay, let me go back. This part, this wall is darker. So on wet, I add even more pigments so that we can see that, okay, in wet, I can feel that there is another wall here that is not the same wall as this one. And by doing so, you will be able to suggest many things, but so many things with very subtle nuances and so on. And it's beautiful in the end without painting everything, just by reinforcing some areas, some darker areas in your painting. And this last step is quite important, because if you don't do this part where you add darker pigments, and then I showed them, okay, if you don't do that, let me show you what will happen. So I did exactly the same exercise with step number 1, which is observing. Step number 2, which is painting the shape, but the global shape, without changing the color, without adding any other pigments. And you can see here, let me show you. Okay, this is the result that I have. This is the result. So it still works. We can still feel that, okay, there are some light. Maybe it's a roof here. It's some kind of a house. But at the same time, if you don't consider that you don't have the pencil strokes here, if you don't have that, it's very difficult for the eye to understand that there is a wall here. That's why it's very important to have this last step where you add some pigments here in order to suggest that, okay, there is a wall, but there is another wall just beside. So this last step is very important, because if you just limit the method to the first 2 steps, you won't be able to convey the right details. You will be able to convey some light, but you won't be able to convey the whole thing with all the little details without painting all the details. So this is the exact method. So please let me know in the comments if it was helpful, and see you soon.